The thing is, I never watched Lord of the Rings. I tried watching it. I couldn't make it through the first movie. Hi, my name is Annalene and I have been reading A Court of Thorns and Roses for like the past month. And I mean the series. I gave in to peer pressure and I finally bought the first book in the series all the way back in September. And I was reading it on holiday. I was loving it, you know, and then I got back from holiday. I kept going, but then in the middle, I felt kind of, I just didn't think that the middle of the book, or like 2/3 of the way, that it kind of stopped keeping my interest. But then I was home for the holidays in December and January, and I decided to finish that book. And oh my god, I haven't been able to stop reading this series since then. So I want to talk about this book series. And these are the 3 books that I have finished in the series. These are the 3 main ones, I believe. I'm actually very confused about the other books that have come out. So I read A Thorn of Courts and Roses, A Court of Mist and Fury, and I also read A Court of Wings and Ruins. And I'm actually not sure which of these 2 is my favorite. I think probably the last one. I think A Court of Wings and Ruins. The reason I'm making this video is because I regret not vlogging this while I was reading it, because these books made me feel things that no book has made me feel in a long time, like in 2 years. They deserve a place on my channel. I won't spoil anything. I actually haven't really planned out what I want to say about these books. I just wanted to talk about them. I'm actually very disappointed in myself that I didn't make a reading vlog for the first book. But the reason why I didn't do that is because I was ashamed. I was ashamed of reading this series and also loving it. I mean no offense or shame to anyone who loves A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas, because I love it as well now. But I was just a little bit skeptic. I don't read high fantasy. I tend to not read YA, although I might think that that is not because I dislike YA, but because of the associations I make with YA and my own prejudice. And the prejudice I think that other people have. Like, I think people would judge me if I, a 26-year-old woman, read YA. Which is a whole different thing to unpack. But that is why I just didn't want to read this series. And when I started reading it, I realized this isn't YA. So to anyone who's still on the fence about reading this series because they think it's YA, it's not YA. No, it isn't. It might start off that way, kind of. The first book is probably the most YA, but then when you progress through the story, through the books, it's not YA. It's high fantasy. I never read any high fantasy. The only fantasy that I have read in my life are like Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. And then also the Trill series by Amanda Hocking. I read that when I was in high school. I have never seen anyone else talk about this series, so I don't think that it caught on. I also don't really watch fantasy films, even though I actually do kind of like it. The thing is, I never watched Lord of the Rings. I tried watching it. I couldn't make it through the first movie. So I just kind of decided that fantasy was not for me, at least not high fantasy. But now I'm like, yeah, fairies, magic. It's so cool. I love it. I also wanted to tell you why I finally did decide to pick this up. And 2 people have influenced me. One of them is Emma Angeline. She has a YouTube channel that I love. Like, I kind of aspire my channel to be like hers. She is not a booktube channel, but she talks about books all of the time. And she tends to read only classics. And so she has a very critical way of looking at books, and she has also a degree in comparative literature, so she likes, you know, she knows, you know, she knows books. And I studied literature as well, not very in depth, but you know, I know books, kind of. And so when she said that she had read this series because of her viewers who told her, like, we think that you would absolutely love this, and she was like, yes, I do love them. I was like, okay, maybe I should pick these up. And then one of my acquaintances talked about this book on their Instagram, and I was like, oh my god, yes, like this is the push I need. I think another thing that kind of pushed me over the edge of buying these or reading these is the cover change that happened in 2020. Like, I hate the original cover. They're terrible. I don't like them at all, and I think these are really cool. I think they're pretty badass, but also colorful. It's really good. The only thing that I don't like is I don't like that, like, this red and this pink purple kind of color, they don't really match very well, I would say. When I started reading A Court of Thorns and Roses, it reminded me of The Hunger Games, but you know, in the best way possible. You know, when I first read The Hunger Games, I was like blown away. I was like, oh my god, this is so good. It's so tense. It's something different from what I've ever read, and I felt the same with this book. Now, of course, a huge disclaimer for this entire video: I never read high fantasy, so I have heard that these books are tropey and that the fairies, that they aren't very, you know, traditional, I guess, that Sarah J Maas like took the idea of fairies and then made them into like cool magical people, which I don't have a problem with because I have never read about fairies, and I just don't have that entire fantasy tropes background. Keep this in mind when I talk about these books. Like, if you are a giant high fantasy connoisseur, then these books are probably not for you. I'm not sure, I don't know. But if you've never read any high fantasy, if you think that it might be up your alley but you're not sure, then I suggest that you read the first book. Things that I like about this series: the characters, like all of them. And not because they're all likable, most of them are, but because they feel very distinct, which sometimes can be a problem. Like, sometimes characters just kind of seem the same, but not in this series. I feel like they're all very distinct, that they have their own personality, that you kind of know beforehand, like, oh, I think this character would vibe this way with that character, you know, before they even meet. And I also really like the character dynamics, especially in like the second and third book with Azriel, Cassian, Riz, Moore, Amran, you know, that whole group. Like, I love them. I also really like the romance. Like, I have to admit this. I like the romance. I like a good enemies to lovers. And if you like enemies to lovers and you have not read this series, boy, there's like multiple enemies to lovers. Something that hasn't really been highlighted in any of the content that I've watched about these books is that they are actually kind of funny at times. I also really like the action scenes. Like, usually I don't really care for action scenes, but these were so gripping, especially in the final novel. Like, the whole end battle, you know, there's a big battle at the end, of course, is so good. It's so gripping. It's so tense. Like, I loved like chapter 47 until like 77 or something. I was at the edge of my seat. I couldn't stop reading. This does not happen to me often. And in the following chapters, I even cried a little bit. And yeah, I do cry very easily, but it doesn't happen a lot when I read books. I'm not sure if I should say this, but there are spicy scenes in this book, especially in the second and third book, and they are spicy. And that is all I will say on that topic. I also really like the world building. Like, you start off in such a small village and the world just expands literally. Like, you go in the first book, you only stay at like the village where Farah lives and then one of the courts where the fairies live. As the books progress, you like visit more places in the world that Sarah J Maas has come up with, and I really like it. And maybe all of these things are very cliche, I don't know. But I like the world building. I also like the stories of the other characters, the backstories. I felt like they all deserved a backstory, and I like that we get to know these characters bit by bit. And there was this whole thing, was something that I didn't like. There was this whole thing about a war that happened 500 years ago. I kept getting confused about who was who and who did what to who, and who were the bad guys and who were the good guys, and how they were all linked to each other. And they never gave a recap. I read the first bit of that backstory back in like September, and when I picked up the book again, the first book, in December, I was like, I don't remember what happened, and I figured that I would get a little recap in like the second or the third book, but that didn't happen. Sarah J Maas just added things, and I did not remember what had happened, and I didn't want to go back and find the passage. I like looked up Sparks notes to see if someone had like summarized it, but I was very cautious of spoilers, of course, because I was still reading the books while I was doing this, and it was just so that might be a thing that, and I know that people hate it when things get recapped in books, but I think there are ways to do it well, and I wish that Sarah J Maas had did it. One thing that I also really liked was the fact that Farah is a painter, and especially at the beginning of the book, before you find this out, you find out like very quickly, but before you find it out, she's already like paying close attention to colors, on what she sees and how things move, and later on she like talks about like how she would paint certain things. I saw some reviews on the Storygraph where people were like, I should do a shot every time Farah pictures a painting in her mind, and I'm like, I like it. That was to me very interesting, because I've never read about a character who likes to paint, who we don't just know likes to paint because people told us, because the author told us, but because like she's actively thinking about it. And I really like the characterization. So these are the main three books, but I'm also reading A Court of Frost and Starlight, which is like, I'm about halfway through, and it kind of feels like a long-winded fan fiction. It's about like the winter solstice and all the celebrations that come along with it, like a day in the life, but then for a few days. And I actually don't really like it. Like, I wish that I could skip it, but I'm not sure if I can. Like, I think you technically can, but I'm so invested in these characters that I also want the extra content, but I wish it would be shorter. It's like 250 pages, which compared to this bad boy of like 700 pages, I believe, that's nothing. But I have been reading it almost the same amount of days as I read A Court of Wings and Ruins. Like, I think I read that in like 11 days, which is very fast for me. And I think I'm almost at 11 days with that little short book. There isn't as much in it happening. It's very slow paced, and it's just like, I want to see where it goes, but I also don't really care. And then there is A Court of Silver Flames that I think is a sequel, but I think the main characters change. I think it's from the perspective of different characters, but I'm not sure. I will wrap this up. I really like this series. I am looking forward to finishing A Court of Frost and Starlight and starting A Court of Silver Flames. I will make a vlog of A Court of Silver Flames because I want to document this. I want to document this excitement that I have about these books, and I want to share it with you. And I want to know what you think of this series. Have you read it? Have you avoided it? Are you planning on reading them? Let me know. I want to talk about these. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed my ramblings. If you agreed with any of the things that I said, give this video a thumbs up so that I know we are like-minded. I upload videos every Wednesday. I make videos about whatever I like. What I like most at the moment is reading, thrifting, and general fashion, lifestyle things. So you get a variety of content here. If you want to check out some of my other videos, you can do so below, or the YouTube algorithm will like suggest a video here and I will suggest a video here. See you next week. Bye.